Greetings. We are Group 10 and we will discuss COVID-19 and digital inequalities, reciprocal impacts, and mitigation strategies by Elizabeth Bunoyer, Sophie Dupery, and Matthew Guiton. I'm Travis Calver and I'll be starting this out. Of all the pandemics that we have experienced throughout history, the COVID-19 pandemic is unique. This can be expressed as unique mainly due to two factors, with it being that more than 30 billion or 42% of the world population is in confinement with its unparalleled magnitude and impacts. And secondly, due to the presence of technology. Technology itself has played an important role in our day-to-day lives, and even more we rely heavily onto it due to the pandemic. Online technology has now become the forefront of our activities due to its great influence, such as how governments and organizations, like the World Health Organization, use online technology to relay their messages and recommendations toward us. We slowly adapt online technology into our daily lives through distance learning, online shopping, and even trying to deal with our economy. However, technology now has become the core factor in trying to maintain active social relationships. Because of this, it has now further emphasized the problem of digital inequality. Digital inequality can be described as the differences between actual access to said technology and digital literacy, meaning the capacity an individual has in interpreting the information received from technology. A simple example of this is how the government would post updates regarding the pandemic with info and guidelines on how to tackle it, and these updates can be easily accessed through your phone or other devices connected to the internet. But there are some people who don't receive or know about any of these updates due to possibly having no internet or any device at all to access the info. With this, digital inequalities are putting socially and economically disadvantaged people at more risk to the virus and the numerous socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic. This paper tries to address the relation between digital inequalities and COVID-19. What will be discussed, however, are digital inequalities as a determinant of health, how COVID-19 potentiates digital inequalities, how digital inequities potentiate vulnerability to COVID-19, and propose some strategies to help mitigate the impacts of digital inequalities. Digital inequalities as a determinant of health. Hargitay has stated that there are four proximal factors that are impacting the degree of ability to use technologies efficiently and effectively, with these factors being its technical means, both the quality of the hardware and software as well as the quality of internet connection, autonomy of use, how and where the device can be accessed as well as its duration, social support networks, assistance from other users, and experience, how familiar the people are with their usage of the device. The use of technology, though, has impacts on the physical, mental, and social health of people. Its impact can be seen through how digital inequalities have consequences, such as how a person can fail to check or maintain their health and well-being. They affect not just older adults, but those who are economically disadvantaged. They reflect existing social inequalities, such as economical status, age, level of education, immigration status, social support network quality, and health literacy. Digital technologies has become a prominent good in order to facilitate communication, interactions, and participations between users locally and internationally. Because of this, it can be said how limited access to these technologies can mean limited access to certain information, goods, or services. Yet, at the same time, without digital literacy, you cannot interpret these information, goods, or services. One of these goods or services is the use of social media. Social media is one of the things that has created an emphasis on social interaction, with having an increase in social capital and a decrease in social isolation. Yet, even with the emphasis, there stem several outlying problems that can affect social interaction, like internet availability within a country or even internet distribution. A problem known as the digital vicious cycle then arises. A digital vicious cycle, as stated by Baum and others, is that being digitally excluded has consequences on health determinants such as education, work, and social networks, which in turn contribute in return to maintain limited access and use of technologies, causing a cycle. Because of this, it can be said that external factors can hinder individual access to technology, while at the same time causing more digital inequality and problems in health. This is further explained in detail later.
Hello, my name is Alvin Christian Amang, and I'm here to talk about how COVID 19 potentiates digital inequalities. So, there are four major digital inequalities that arose from COVID 19: technical means, autonomy of use, and social support networks, and finally, experience. The COVID 19 pandemic has provoked massive, immediate, and unprecedented changes in the population's use of digital technologies. Pre COVID 19, the access to internet was not necessarily a priority, as some people would be able to function normally without it. However, with the global lockdown severing personal ties, it is suddenly so important to use the internet in order to maintain our fundamental social structures. This has caused the status of virtual spaces to shift from amenity to necessity. At this point, it's hard to imagine using anything other than technology to help us with our daily tasks. Due to this, there is a chance, or there is an increase of dependency towards technology, especially during COVID, where everything has to be done through the internet. Although some people can't access technology, this is due to financial problems or lack of digital literacy. These people, on the other hand, will be at a huge disadvantage. COVID 19 will surely cause or deepen any digital inequalities. Low income households, in particular, will be the least prepared for this sudden shift, as they lack in both numbers and quality. And it's hard enough to get by with such a small salary. Technological advancements would be the least of their worries. However, if they do have technology, it is unlikely that they would be using updated systems. Using outdated equipment generates longer delays in accessing online resources, if accessible at all, which can create a less satisfying experience, resulting in fewer opportunities to use the internet, technologies, and consequently fewer opportunities to develop digital literary skills. This is the opposite for economically favored households, because they have more than enough funds to upgrade their equipment. This translates to better entertainment, education, and digital literacy. Another thing is that due to home confinement, the internet will be slower than usual, with everybody using it and all. This isn't a problem if one buys the premium package for internet with high speeds. However, households with lower income would not be able to afford the best internet connections in terms of speed and data usage, without sacrificing essential spendings. In opposition, those with greater internet packages will likely not experience the slower connections at the same scale. Now on to autonomy. Households with more members will obviously have to share internet, downloading data, and entertainment modules such as, Netflix, television, and etc. But it's also different for those people who don't have personal computers. Those people who rely on the library or Wi-Fi hotspots on coffee shops. Inequalities in the autonomy of use are especially concerning because government authorities are closing numerous centers that people could use to access the internet. Also, the prospects of finding a job will also be affected. Finding a job in the pandemic context will be more challenging for those with limited digital skills. besides issues relating physical access to the internet. The perception of freedom in technology use will also be altered by COVID-19 induced confinement. Indeed, internet use at home is becoming further restricted by other family members' presence, such as the children or by telework imperatives, raising the challenges surrounding carrying out desired online activities. On to social support network. The social support network factor contributes to digital skills in multiple ways, having assistance in the form of recommendations or advice. The exposure to technologies in the social network will raise the likelihood to adapt and get used to new technologies. Therefore, people who learn from their contacts will learn quicker. However, isolation makes it harder for us to actually get support because of the lack of contact. It becomes a pretty challenging job to try to teach a non digital literate person, but it's easier if the person is familiar with the technology in the first place. For instance, when facing a problem with internet connection, support might only be offered through phone communication, leaving the person to realize the manipulations by themselves. But for the more digitally disadvantaged individuals, support could be harder to obtain or meet the needs. Whereas with those with higher digital skills could adapt to new means of support much easier. And lastly, experience. The factor of experience does not contribute to the betterment of digital skills. With the pandemic time spent online, this will likely increase the skills of those who have access to it. Although exposures such as school or work to acquire digital literacy would be reduced. People who have more experience will likely have an easier time adapting to the pandemic. They will also spend more time online during the pandemic, therefore continuously increasing their digital skills. Less experienced users, however, are prone to be exposed to potentially addictive applications like online games.
Hi, this is Luis Argusino, and I will be talking about how digital inequalities potentiate vulnerability to COVID-19. It is very evident that we have become much more dependent on technology in almost everything that we do since the pandemic started. We use it to socialize, to buy essential goods, to keep up with the news, and the like. But most importantly, we stay updated on the health protocols which are disseminated by health organizations through online platforms. In this sense, we can say that technology greatly influences our capacity to stay safe and not contract the virus. Here, the concept of e-health literacy is introduced. This is the ability of a person to understand the health guidelines communicated online and apply it to everyday life. But for the socially and economically disadvantaged, this has not been so easy, because they are on the receiving end of digital inequalities. Digital inequalities could potentiate both the vulnerability to the virus itself and the vulnerability to the consequences of the crisis. First of all, how could digital inequalities increase one's susceptibility to the virus? Some social groups, such as low-income households, older adults, the homeless, and some rural residents, might have a harder time accessing and understanding the protocols online due to the lack of equipment or slow to no internet connection. This could lead to the possibility of not being fully aware of what actions to take and be at higher risk of exposure to the virus. In addition to this, since systems have switched to becoming digital, online grocery shopping and telemedicine have been more used. However, some families could not afford such services considering the delivery fees and other expenses. So they would opt to go to the market or to the hospital, which again exposes people to the virus. Another thing to consider is how some individuals do not have internet connection at home and would usually go to computer shops or other public places to use the internet. For example, some teachers and students now need to use computer shops to conduct online classes, which could be very detrimental to their health. We could compare this to advantaged individuals who could attend online classes or do work safely at home. The said situations make digital and social inequalities even more evident during this crisis. As for the negative consequences or aftermath of the crisis, the socially and economically disadvantaged is once again more at risk. Since most of the individuals coming from the said sector have lower digital literacy, they could be an easy target for fake news, which persisted during this lockdown with many people using the internet. Some individuals may not be critical about what information to consume. Also, several fake news go against health protocols, and the most hazardous part of this is that some people would believe such news, which could cause harm to themselves and to the people around them. Furthermore, it was mentioned in the paper that another consequence of this crisis is the increase in psychological distress. Most people use digital media to connect to others as a coping mechanism from the stress brought about by the pandemic. But again, only limited people are able to utilize this. Some people with mental health conditions could not easily access and afford therapy sessions online, which could lead to more negative mental health implications. Generally, because technology has been more integrated in our lives, it can be said that one of the bases of a person's health and overall well-being is rooted in how accessible the benefits of the internet are and who can afford this accessibility. In line with this, what must the government, corporations, communities, and individuals do to alleviate these inequalities?
I am Athena Cardenas and I'm gonna explain the strategies of mitigation. Different mitigation strategies should be implemented due to the challenges and complexities that digital inequalities represent for the resilience of the people to COVID-19. These strategies will not only focus on mitigating the impact of COVID-19 on digital inequalities, but also the impact of digital inequalities on COVID-19 vulnerability. The implementation of these strategies will be multi-layered as it needs to consider several levels of decision, which are governmental, organizational, community, and individual, all of which are in partnership with research and higher education structures. Because it is in the specific context of COVID-19, all strategies to be implemented should have the goal of equity and actionability, which means that the strategies to be implemented should translate into possibilities of action for the people. All strategies are aimed at people, but some have specific targets. For example, some strategies target people's access and use of technology, while others focus on the message itself. The strategies are divided into two, both of which have different areas and scope. The first set of strategies that I'll be discussing is composed of strategies which target people's access and use of technology. Under this, we have the strategy to increase physical access to connected devices and internet. This strategy aims to ensure that the population has access to optimal technology, not only in terms of connectivity, but also in terms of having equipment. This strategy is important in reducing the impact of digital inequalities. The first step in increasing physical access is to spot the digital deserts. Digital deserts are the gray areas wherein disparities of access to technology exists. Alternative transitory solutions can be offered using mobile internet relay, such as through broadcasting trucks. The government should also increase the coverage of internet networks and its capabilities together with telecommunication companies. Meanwhile, assisting low-income households in accessing devices can be done through public fundings. Aside from the government, the community can also take part in the increasing physical access to the internet by holding donation of used devices. The next strategy would be to increase digital literacy. This would entail reinforcing families and community peer support to promote the acquisition of digital skills. This strategy would also be focusing on actions towards e-health literacy. For those who have digital access and skills, the promotion may be done in different platforms through tutorials and the like. With the help of the government, corporations, and educational institutions, they can help in developing the materials, making its access free. There is also a need to integrate and increase the presence of acquiring digital skills in the educational systems. The third strategy would be to increase access to social support. This strategy would focus on the creation, aggregation, and diffusion of information on multimodal platforms including communication features. In this strategy, There is a need to diffuse information for digital literate persons for them to be aware of the difficulties that might be faced by other internet users and to advise them to use the apps that they are most confident with. Diffusing information on unconventional spaces would also help in getting support. The next set of strategies is composed of strategies which target the message. Under this is the strategy to increase the diffusion of messages. In order to increase the diffusion, there is a need to increase the redundancy of information. Repetitively sharing information increases the chance of the information to be deemed as important by the population. This also helps in the efficacy of the propagation of important information in virtual communities with low density. The interconnectivity of social media platforms could help in promoting interaction with the citizens and their engagement with the message. However, it is important that the redundancy come from channels which are credible and can be trusted. Aside from redundancy of information, increasing the diversity of online sources can help people reach messages. With this, there is a need to target platforms which people are more comfortable using. However, since not all have access to internet, it is also important to focus on offline sources to reach people who are digitally excluded. The next strategy is to increase the control over the quality of the messages. During this pandemic, fake information became rampant in different platforms, leaving large-scale impacts which are deemed to be extremely deleterious. With this, it is important to develop strategies that would aim to detect and block misleading information. According to the study, one of the most powerful methods of fighting fake information is to increase the visibility of validated sources. With the help of the giants of the internet, information from the government and public health organizations can be ranked first in search engines. It is also important to note that people who have limited digital literacy have the tendency of exposing themselves to frauds and threats. With this, campaigns focusing on cybercriminality awareness are important, especially for the disadvantaged people. The third strategy is to increase the understandability of the messages. Understanding public health information is very important in reducing the toll of the pandemic, which is why focus should be given in simplifying messages, increasing their readability, and increasing actionability. This means that messages should be simplified in terms of the language used and terminologies used. There is also a need to evaluate which information are essential so that people may focus on it rather than on the non-essential information. Other ways of simplifying the messages can also be done through visual implementations such as charts. More importantly, in developing the messages, actionability should always be the goal. The last strategy is to increase the acceptability of the messages. The study highlights that it is important to ensure information and recommendations acceptability. However, strategies in this area will vary depending on the sociocultural and geographical context. It is also important that these strategies are tailored according to people's needs. In order to increase the acceptability of the messages, there is a need to reduce the directive tone of the messages to avoid over-authoritative stances. The prevailing crisis will pave way for the increase of economical and inter-individual tensions. With this, there is a need to prevent the propagation of stigmatizing messages. In conclusion, preparation is an important element in crisis management discourses. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the world population which are not prepared enough to deal with the societal impacts of pandemics like COVID-19 at a global level. Assessing what happened in previous epidemics, it was observed how those who are socially and economically disadvantaged are more prone to catching diseases. The researchers of the study highlighted that there is a need for a series of political and community interventions which aim to solidify social safety net in order to support those who are vulnerable, as well as to prevent this vulnerability and social health inequalities. Even before the current pandemic, there had always been social inequalities. The study states that the current pandemic is revealing an emerging form of technology-related social inequalities that were already prevailing for quite some time, however, not given enough attention. According to the researchers, the implementation of mitigation strategies must be anchored in a specific sociocultural context, as there exists variation in the political and economical systems in different countries. Future research must assess how online behavior impacted and was impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. Aside from conducting quantitative investigations, it is also important to take into account the experiences of people in the time of crisis. These narratives play an important role in the context of progressive end of the quarantine that has been initiated in different countries. Reciprocally and complementarily, quantitative studies might have an advantage from integrating qualitative data to help in contextualizing the results in order to ensure operationability of data. The current pandemic has shown how digital inequalities became a major factor of vulnerability, both to the health-related impacts and the socio-economical consequences of the COVID-19. Due to the pandemic, isolation became more drastic. People tend to rely on virtual spaces, digital media, and mass media for information diffusion. But most importantly, these are the spaces wherein they can interact with other people. The challenges brought by digital inequalities have gravely affected population health and well-being, so there is a need to prioritize this issue. This pandemic is an eye-opener to how public and global health is being managed. The mitigation strategies proposed in the study does not only aim in reducing digital inequalities, but also to contribute in combating the current crisis.